Okay, so we're going to keep moving swiftly on. So Phil, can I just give you a couple of minutes on, ways in which you might see legal protections for future generations being brought to the fore? And you just have 3 minutes on this.
Okay, thank you. Well, you know that in the UK, we have a minister for climate change, and that's a huge step. But the job is actually linked to energy. So it's the Minister for Energy and Climate Change, and you'll notice that the word energy comes first. And this is the constant battle. As you're saying, you make some progress, but it is undermined. And I particularly want to refer to the trade negotiations which are going on at the moment, called the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership. If you haven't heard of this, it's so important that you get into it and look it up, because these are happening basically in secret. They are basically proposed by the corporations, and the politicians will be asked to agree to a whole lot of things, and they're going to have to be mighty strong, and they'll only be strong if you are strong. And a key aspect of those negotiations is the setting up of tribunals, which would be run by. They would be run outside domestic courts. So it would be the loss of our democratic rights through our own courts to be able to take decisions when there are disputes between nations and corporations. We ignore it at our peril. Deregulation is happening at many levels, and if this one goes through at the international level, I don't know what the answer is when, I think you're just heading for very big civil unrest eventually, and that just seems so sad when we could think this through more together. Somehow get the politicians to start talking, because at the moment the corporations can play off one government against another. We'll move our headquarters and our tax systems to another country if you don't play ball. And no one country can stand up against that. It needs the cooperation of all countries. Thank you.
Thank you. Bishop Gomez, can I just ask you as well? I mean, you've obviously attended a lot of these global conferences on climate change. I mean, do you feel a moral argument is coming through there? Has it started to be articulated in the debates? Or are there blockages to that?
I have followed several of these COP meetings, yes. And I could see that I remember in Copenhagen meeting, therefore, governments were preparing a paper, and they could not prepare an adequate paper. There were not substantial changes that they could sign. And there was also kind of a feeling going on that maybe the President of the United States would not come to sign. Then he had to come. So there was a kind of moral obligation from the states, I felt, that the issue is so vast, so I think proper, and touching upon the lives of so many people that we must address it. And that was one main gain, I think, at that time, I felt. And there is kind of a humbling feeling on the part of the states, which is, I think, also is a gain, I think, at that time. They could not sign something very proper, but that feeling was there. And then I could think that they would depend on private sectors quite a bit also. That the private sectors have something to say, like people present here, I think they are representing that sector. We have a lot of things that we can do, and I think the government feels that too, and we should also insist upon that point. And in Rio, I felt also there was how to feel that the indigenous peoples, the simple peoples also have their own simple industries that they do. So we must also relate to those. There's also a kind of a moral, I think, push to reflect on their lives as well, not only on our technologies. And then the role of the church, the religions, that also became quite obvious, that they must, be very much present in this issue for the poor and the rich alike, I think. that we all must live on this earth in a very dignified way with dignity. So the moral question came very much into the picture in this.
That's good that it did. That's reasons to be positive. Okay, we are just going to go into a last round of questions to the panel so that we can get our money's worth out of them. And then I'll open it up to the floor. So I'm going to try and keep at least 10 minutes for that. And we might actually, we'll see how far we get with that. So the next question is to Father Sean McDonough. A lot of mention has been made about the papal encyclical. Just briefly, how significant do you think it is?
It's extremely significant, but way beyond where the church or any church is at this time. Just let me give you an example of that. In 1990, Pope John Paul II, and he wasn't a retiring pope, he was pretty strong. He wrote, "In peace with God the Creator, peace with all creation. A new ecological awareness is beginning to emerge, which rather than being downplayed, ought to be encouraged to develop into concrete programs and initiatives." What parish in this country has a Care of the Earth ministry? What diocese around the world has a Care of the Earth ministry? I don't know whether they're there. So unless this is taken seriously, and my suggestion is we do a church process which are called a synod on 3 years. Tip O'Neill said all politics is local, and I think he might be wrong, but the reality, all ecology is local. And I'd love to see the first year in local dioceses and parishes. Now, my own area, in the Diocese of Killaloe, you'd be talking about the seas, you'd be talking about internal waters, you'd be talking about encountering in creation. So you build on this and use the encyclical as a way of doing that. So that after a year, people, and particularly the leaders of the church, working not in a hierarchical way, but working with all kinds of people and doing it ecumenically, would come away with a hugely increased knowledge and a hugely increased faith experience of the presence of God in creation. So then the second year, you would do it at national level, because a country like Ireland, there are different ecosystems around the country, and again, I think you could build up people who are competent in this area. Part of the reason why this hasn't gone beyond these kind of gatherings is because people aren't competent. Is it sulfur dioxide or is it carbon monoxide? They don't know what it's about. And particularly asking religious leaders to stand up. I was down in Lima last year for the UNFCCC. The chair of the Bishops' Conference, a very nice man, said he didn't know much about climate change. He was a city boy, but a peasant up in the Altiplano told him it was hard to grow potatoes with climate change. He's a very good man. The following day, the Mass was in Advent. It was a lovely reading from Isaiah, talked about Advent. So we actually haven't got this through. And like, for example, in Maynooth, is there a Care of the Earth ministry in the pastorate here? I'm sure there's pastoral work done around the university. Is ecological theology being taught as a serious subject? Not as a subject that you're coming out the door. Unless that happens, what exactly happened to Pope John Paul's peace with God the Creator, peace with all, will actually happen again. The third year would be at a global level.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Bishop Gomez, for you, obviously as a bishop yourself, what for you is the key message of the encyclical?
I think the encyclical tries to bring us very much to the ground, base things of development. We think of a lot of, we also think of the development or going away from this earth planet, that we shall discover so many other planets, etc. But then I think we belong here, it's our home, and we belong here together, integrated, human persons and all things, small, great, everything. We come together as integrated in communion. And I think that is the religiosity, that is religion at the end, where our heart comes together. I think the encyclical tries to bring us very simply together, and if we consider all these things together, rich and poor alike, we will find our solutions, because we shall be together. And I think also there is a very fine point in this, that we must also think of the earth as a very central thing. There was that once we thought the earth, everything was moving around the earth, and that was wrong. So we said, no, the sun is at the center. But I think functionally, the earth is at the center of activities. We go to discover, we find stones and things in the other planets. But here, chemistry, biology all has centered, integrated, in the living persons. And our next stage would be, how will this earth be a better integrated reality, and human persons also, human society, rather than disintegrate it and go beyond it, away from it. So I think to belong to the earth is a very fundamental thing that is coming through here, and the responsibility of the human society, humanity, is great to do that integration and communion. I think this is what is coming through.
I'm just going to go to Anya and then I'll come back to yourself. Yeah, so Anya, sorry, just from your point of view, to what extent can a religious teaching such as this have an impact on political and legal debates?
Well, I think it's very clear that any appeal to our fundamental values, our sense of justice, can be a very powerful motivator. I think it comes back to the general points we've heard a few times. This particular encyclical was well handled by the Vatican, so to speak. It got traction. It's still getting publicity. It's keeping the issue out there. So hopefully some of that will brush off on our political leaders. And again, it's up to us to keep it there in that particular public frame. But there's no doubt that the Vatican or the Pope certainly got legal advice when they were drafting this. I went through it, and it's a long document, but I went through it with a lawyer's eyes. And I was surprised and happy to see there's an entire section from paragraph 182 on environmental impact assessment, EIA, environmental impact assessment, a hobby horse of mine. And you're very well written, and a very, very strong nod to local populations. And I'm thinking here about how many local communities in Ireland feel very aggrieved that certain types of unwelcome development have, in their view, been more or less foisted on them without, they would argue, adequate participation, adequate information. And the Pope speaks and says the local population should have a special place at the table. They are concerned about their own future and that of their children, and they can consider goals transcending immediate economic interest. Transcending immediate economic interest. So I think that resonates very well with the forthcoming white paper on energy policy that we are expecting in the autumn, when there has been some talk, some political talk, of engaging more and listening more to local communities. So I think certainly that the common themes are coming through, not just in the encyclical, but hopefully in law and practice also. It's hugely significant.
Thank you very much. Phil, you wanted to say something very briefly, because I want to open
Very
it up.
briefly, yes,
Yeah.
thank you. I only skimmed through the encyclical, and absolutely wonderful in so many ways. Now, my impression is that it doesn't deal much with the economy, and that may be because the Pope's previous encyclical, the last one, Gaudium Evangelii, does a lot of that. And I just want to link up the two for a moment with a quote from him. "The worship of the golden calf of old has found a new and heartless image in the cult of money and the dictatorship of an economy which is faceless and lacking any human goal. An economy which is faceless and lacking any human goal." Thank you.
Thank you for that. Okay, thank you very much to the panel. Now, we do have 10 minutes. We've managed to save that time, so I very much appreciate some I'd like to not fall apart in the process. So this gentleman up here, and there's also a gentleman in a green t-shirt over there, and there's a gentleman here with a white beard, which is very fashionable, let me say. Oh, apologies. Okay, so, yes, okay, okay, so yourself, yeah, you go ahead.
Thank you. My question particularly to Dr. Anya Royal, but anybody else who wants to join in is welcome. I'm a lawyer myself and in legal education, though nothing like your distinction, Dr. Royal. But I just wanted to ask on the question of, I remember when I studied constitutional law at college, one of the first cases to the lecturer based anything on was the 65 case Ryan against the Attorney General, where the judge had said that there could be personal rights other than those enumerated, specified in the Constitution. I mean, could that be used in any way with the right judge, in an appropriate case, just to get some, even though that was arbitrary and not part of the judgment, that it would be good not just for Ireland, if that could be an appropriate case, to say that there was, say, a personal right to, or could be a personal right to breathe clean air or whatever, or to have staple weather systems, so we know where we are with 4 seasons or whatever in their place. And would that be of use not just domestically in Ireland to plead that in a appropriate case, but if even another remark was made by a judge positive to that, it might be of use abroad in constitutional cases. You know, the way we look to American cases in constitutional law, whatever, that could be used. And as well as that, judicial review, could that be used when you talked about declarations in the Netherlands? We could have a declaration maybe here on a judicial review that the government was failing in its duties to citizens in allowing maybe global warming, or the minister recently came back from Brussels having obtained a derogation, Minister of Agriculture, very worthwhile in its own way, to allow methane gas levels to ignore, or at least be a derogation from the European directives on levels of methane gas, because it's so important to our economy. Under the old politics, that was probably a good result, but in terms of the new and international thing that we all have to do our bit internationally, that could be seen as, maybe you get a declaration that was in breach or something, a duty, or I just wondered.
Great. Okay, I think we have your points. So I'm just going to gather up a few. Okay, so the gentleman in the green, and then the gentleman with the white beard, and then the gentleman with the black beard, and then there's a gentleman down here. The beards are really useful, actually. So I know, I'm looking for women, so if any woman wants to... So you'll come in. Okay, all right, so I've got 2 women now that I can see, so let me go through yourself. If you can make it pretty sharp, thanks.
Okay, no problem. I'd like to say to Sean, I agree totally with him about his God in the cutaway bog. I myself live in South America, in Brazil. I've been there for 35 years. We have catastrophic problems there, in spite of the perception that Brazil is, you know. Mm-hmm. And I'm just wondering a little bit about the constant reference in discourse to human rights. And in Ecuador, I think it's the only country in the world, nature has been inserted into the Constitution as having rights. Okay? So maybe we could think a little less about human rights, and in line with Sean's talk on the interconnectedness of all things, where are the rights of those things?
Great. Thank you for that intervention. And so, okay, so you're going out of order? Yeah. Well, I just want to try and keep some order, so I'll come back to you in a minute. So I think it was the gentleman in the white beard and then this gentleman. If you can just take notes.
Thank you very much. Every culture worldwide has its creation story, including of which Christianity is one. Given the kind of knowledge we now have about the creation of the universe, going right back from that initial flaring forth, do we need a new creation story? And would Sean and the other members of the panel consider that the creation story in The Universe Story by Brian Swim and Thomas Berry is a one? And if we have a new creation story, and this comes back right to what was said about Ecuador, should we also be including in our own little patch of creation, namely Ireland, something in our constitution about the environment? When the Constitution Convention was meeting, I saw many hands raised up in public meetings about protecting the environment, yet the Constitution Convention dismissed it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. This gentleman up here, and then we'll go to that lady over there, that woman over there. Thanks.
Thank you. I'll try to be brief. My name is Joe O'Brien. I'm a member of a species that almost went extinct 4 years ago. I'm a Green Party member. I also happen to be a subspecies of that species who's actually going for election to get into Parliament, to get into the Dáil next year. So quite a rare breed in Dublin North. There's been a lot of talk about political will, so I feel I need to stand up. I canvassed 8 masses over the weekend about the encyclical. I canvassed about 80 doors and tried to bring climate change to the doors. I think politicians need to bring climate change to the doors. They can't wait for it to come there. And I just want to address briefly the theme of the conference, evidence to action. It's a big leap. We've been trying to do it ourselves for quite a while. There's a skill in doing it. You have to meet people where they are, I think. We've been accused in the past of being a little bit preachy, and I think as activists, more broadly speaking, we need to be careful not to be preachy. We have to recognise people's realities. I think ways of doing that is connecting things up with local events, flooding, difficulties in getting insurance and so on. But I think more broadly speaking, there's an overall belief across society that the next generation's life will be a little bit better. And parents, and as a parent myself, you kind of work towards the belief that, well, my kid's life is going to be at least a little bit better than my one. We have to attack that belief at its core. That is not necessarily going to be the case in terms of what's ahead of us. We have to challenge that. And finally, a last point, 1916, it's a big year next year. A very important document was written almost 100 years ago that was trying to frame the challenge that was ahead of the country at the time. When we reflect on 1916 next year, we have to look forward to the next 100 years as well and talk about the challenge that's going to come up in front of us over the next 100 years. And I think we should bring climate change into that paradigm.
Thank you very much. Okay, this...
Sorry, I got first shout yesterday, so I guess I'm being a little pushy today, demanding the mic now. No, my name is Emery Riley. I'm here on behalf of the Lutheran Church in Ireland, and I just wanted to address the point there about a care of the earth ministry in the churches, just to point out for people's awareness. I know the idea, I applaud the idea and the idea of synods and education from the top down in the church, but I also wanted to remind people before we break into our smaller groups where I know all the faith people will be talking to each other, which is wonderful. But while we're a group together, the people who have a basis in Christian faith or other faiths, that you're reminded that your church is made of you. So when you look around and say, what can I do? Where can I go to get involved in this issue? It can be your church, and it may have changed since the last time you were there for a funeral or a wedding. So I just wanted to point out the fact that the church is changing. There is a call for religion to change, as Father Sean has said, but that it is changing all the time. I know Eco Congregations Ireland is here somewhere as well, and they're very involved. If you look them up, and maybe look to your own church, and remember that the power comes from you as well. That's all right.
Thank you for that. So we're coming down to this gentleman here, and this. Oh dear. Pardon me? Yes, I know. I have. We're going 5 minutes over, aren't we? Yeah. Okay, so we're going to have these 2 more interventions, and I'm going to go back to the panel and give them a couple of minutes each to respond as they see fit.
Could you make a very,
okay.
very short, and I think important point. And I think an important point, the conflict between capitalism and environmentalism. Yes. Which is a basic theme, and our aim. Sorry. The conflict in a possible conflict between capitalism and environmentalism, and really one of the aims should be, very simply, that capitalism would be a low C, and environmentalism would be higher C, and in the end, for humanity, it would be more at peace. But there are the big challenges.
Sure. Okay, thank you. Sorry, this gentleman here.
Donald Gagan with Greenpeace Europe and other places. Certainly, from what I heard of the Pope last week, it would seem to me that what the Pope said went completely against our own tradition and culture around morality. Our own tradition, culture, and morality has been based on personal morality. And the collective part, the community part of the morality is based on the imposition on people of a personal moral code. that's the tradition in this country. If we're to move away from that, what form of new morality will we take on? If we're relying on the law, certainly in terms of the tradition in the law, for the law in Ireland, it's something that we don't make, it's imposed on us. That's why we look to derogations from EU directives. That's why we look for to get out of our 2020 and our 2030 targets for climate mitigation. If we're to create a new moral imperative in this country, surely we can't go back to basing it on a personal morality, which is about just changing our own lifestyle, which I've heard people speak about. Yes, we can do that, but we need to do a lot more than that. So can we not move to a political moral imperative?
Great. Okay, yourself. You're going to have the last word here.
My name is Tara Finglas and I'm from Mission Cara. And my question is, if the law will only get us so far, are we wasting our time with targets and limits on CO2 emissions? And what recourse is there on violators in terms of individuals, companies and countries?
Okay, thank you very much. Right, so we've tried to get as many people in as we can, and we are running out of time. So we have 5 minutes where the panel were going to get their last few words. So I'm hoping that they might just pick up on some of those questions or issues that were raised in their last intervention. So maybe if I start with you, Anya, if you would just take a couple of minutes. We've really only got 5 minutes at this point, so a minute and a half, please.
Oh, okay. That's a tall order. Very well-informed audience. Very quickly, the first gentleman there mentioned the constitutional law case back in the 1960s, Ryan and Ireland, where effectively the court acknowledged that a right to bodily integrity was protected by the Constitution. So what that case and others like it demonstrates is, even though our Constitution doesn't explicitly say there is a right to a certain level of environmental quality or a certain right to environmental protection, the courts might, into the future, decide to recognise that right. The Constitution is a product of its time. Some of the more modern constitutions across the world, Ecuador was mentioned, they do recognise various environmental rights. But it's important not to limit ourselves to Ireland. The EU treaties, for example, have some very strong environmental rights provisions. The Charter of Fundamental Rights of the European Union, there's a specific article there on the environment. And people talked about the interconnectedness with nature and the rights of nature as opposed to a pure human rights approach. I think I would remind people of the Habitats Directive, which is coming into its own now. It's been litigated constantly before the High Court. Some very big successes there in terms of protecting biodiversity, protecting habitat. So again, there are legal measures there that are being used, and I think people here have identified boundaries that can be pushed. And there certainly is potential there. I don't want to hog all the time, so I'll just respond to the last question, which picks up on some of the interim questions. You mentioned, if the law won't get us where we need to go, are we then wasting our time obsessing about targets? Well, of course not. I mean, the target is the law, and if you break the law, if you don't have a target, you've nothing to pitch for. So absolutely, we have to have targets, and ambitious ones at that, which we don't have in Ireland, apart from the EU and international law targets. But there are consequences, of course, and we saw recently in the UK where the NGO Client Earth sued the UK government under the EU Air Pollution Directive and secured an enormous victory in Luxembourg and also more recently in the UK Supreme Court. And somebody mentioned earlier sanctions for Ireland where we breach EU law. We've been fined twice already for breaching EIA law and also wastewater treatment provisions. So there are sanctions, but it's the awareness again that needs to happen. Thank you.
Thank you. Sean, would you like to just...
Yeah, well, one thing I'd like to comment on is there's a real ambivalence about religion and ethics or values. One of the institutions involved in this is a seminary. And surely there would have been some real clarity about actually the theological dimension of this. I mean, Laudato Si is fundamentally a theological document. It's a pastoral document. There's a whole section on the scriptures. There's a whole section on creation theology. And to look at it as a whole, but it does remind me in Ireland, religious talk, it's not a good space at this time for any religious talk, that we will reduce everything just to, the ethical values that come out of it. I mean, if the ethical values come out of this world, I mean, when I wrote the book To Care for the Earth, in 1984, the reality was a call to a new theology. And if we don't have that discourse, we will be just treating theology at the periphery of any kind of discussion, and I don't think we're going to make any progress. So if anyone asks you about Laudato Si, it is a theological document. It's a pastoral reflection of the Bishop of Rome, and he makes that point very clearly.
Okay. Thank you very much, Sean. Very quickly now, Phil, your last comment.
Okay, thank you. I'd like us to slow down and go inside, because we are presented with quite overwhelming information. You know, the size of the problem, its urgency. If we're not experiencing a lot of fear, a lot of helplessness, that would be very surprising. I certainly do on times. It returns and it goes. And I want to make a plea for sharing of what's inside us, as well as the objective information. Because if we don't get support, we're never going to get anywhere. We've got to receive support and give it to others. And many people out there, they don't have the connections that many of us in this room have. We need to be thinking of them. In a way, we are all climate deniers. Thank you.
Thank you, Phil. And I'm going to give the last word to Bishop Gomez, so if you would like to give the last word of the blessing before lunch, which is imminent.
When I was a student in the United States and in Europe also, I could feel that that generation, our parents, after the war, were thinking that our children will not suffer from lack of material goods, food, house, etc. And I think that is what has gone on, and maybe we have come to a point of saturation in the well-being of material goods, and a new epoch is coming. I think young generation is already giving us the hint that they want something else. I can feel that, and they would like more inner values to come through, which is a beautiful thing, I think. So I think we can hope for that. Kind of a passing from one epoch to another epoch, from the industrialized economy, let us say, into a more moral, spiritual, in a very common sense, spiritual means integrated, communion, etc. That kind of a spirituality is coming through. So I think we can pray for that, and that is the blessing that is in our prayer in our heart, and surely that will come through, and our young generation will carry that for us.
Thank you very much, Bishop. Okay, listen, folks, I want to really say thank you very much for attending this session on the moral imperative to act. I think it's been a brilliant session. I'm going to hand over housekeeping issues now to Lorna. Sorry we went a little bit over time, but we did start late, and thank you so much for your interventions. And may I just ask for a round of applause for the speakers.